Wikipedia defines Gothic horror as a mainly 20th century literary aesthetic of fear and haunting. That fear, supernatural occurrences, and the intrusion of past upon present are all characteristics of this genre of fiction writing. Authors and poets of the time depended on the physical look of their surroundings, like local architecture, think old churches and crypts, as well as the love and loss that they have experienced in their own lives. Now we're here again with resident expert on all things Gothic, musician Strange Nocturnal, and his experience almost mirrors the Gothic authors themselves.
First introduction to Gothic horror, I was born Shakespeare's birthday and death day, so it was Macbeth, probably with Shakespeare. But what I actually picked up myself was when I was in a school library, which is a very Gothic Victorian building. My grandparents would tell me how they went there. It was that, and yeah, got onto the little hardback, beautiful illustrations of Frankenstein, the Mummy, the Wolfman. But my favorite was Dracula. And it was the kids' versions of those with the pictures. And I couldn't watch the movies, but these books were available in the children's library, and the classic section. Yeah, they're fanciful and nice, and that's just like daintily nice life, like it is boring around here. And then I've got these, the nighttime and the night creatures and the bats and the things we don't really know about. Do you know what I mean? And that was it.
Strange Nocturnal expresses a belief that, like Gothic music, there are many reoccurrences of the same thoughts and ideas, especially as authors come into contact with each other and their work.
That's just as people are discovering it, like a new generation is discovering it, they're then applying it and doing it, and then that's popping up here and there, little renaissances. If anyone knows anybody, there's lots of who's mad, bad, and dangerous to know Lord Byron, George Gordon Byron. Me growing up being into horror and anything like that, I had him highly recommended. My adoptive mother worked on a Ken Russell film, and he later went on to do Gothic with Julian Sands, Percy Blythe Shelley, and awesome portrayal of Mary Shelley, who later, and it tells the story of them creating Frankenstein. And yeah, I think it's just a wonderful thing as a poet to another poet. And they were around the same time, but we're not sure if they were alive during the same time. Now, that's like a passing on the torch kind of thing between storytelling, and that's a lot happens in Gothic literature.
What's more interesting is that Gothic literature is, in a way, timeless. Looking back to our previous conversation on Gothic music, he noted that the stories that came from these works had not only an entertainment factor, but a lesson to them.
That it was planets and alchemy and physiology and chemistry as well. So there's hints of all that in horror. And I find it very fascinating how there's a nurturing side to it, in the sense it's very maternal, very paternal. It's the things that a parent would be scared of for their child growing up in a world, and it's kind of saying, look, we know how to deal with that, and it's we're doing so in a fun and safe environment. And yeah, you know, we've got these babies now, so if there's any zombies coming, you know, we were prepared for. But we don't think that people are going to be looking after themselves and turning themselves completely feral, so they want to eat people's brains just yet. You know, I've said to many people about gangster films, and I'll say the same about horror films. Anybody that watches anything like that and looks up to it doesn't get the moral of the story, because the moral of the story at the end is they die, you know, and it's what keeps you good, that keeps you alive.
And though many of these lessons that we're familiar with come from Western authors like Lord Byron, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, and Charles Dickens, Gothic fiction is a decidedly universal aesthetic.
And something that is apparent in Gothic literature is they either travel or have been traveled and learned people, or they've spoken to traveled and learned people of different cultures, and they're getting things from their cultures, seeing the correspondences within their own. But people are bored of the same old story and the same old boogeyman. So they go to different cultures, and that's where we get the zombies from Africa to New Orleans. And we get vampires popping up here and there.
We're reading works from those who are well traveled and educated. These authors, having had the chance to really experience different cultures and traditions, took those, mixed with their own life experiences, and created an aesthetic that readers flock back to in droves.
I think it's both a comfort and a discomfort, in the sense of we're born, we've got life, and we know, and when we do know that we die, there's a prominent fear of everything that we can do can harm us and can affect us later on. And that's the initial basis of all that is definitely horror and Gothic horror. The elements, everything is a potential threat. Anything can cause the hysteria, but it's when you read it and the characters and the atmospheres, you start to realize, and when you do realize, it becomes less scary. And you become more masterful of your mind, your body, and your surroundings, and working with the seasons and stuff like that. But so you've got Lord Byron there, and he's hanging out with Percy Shelley. He's hanging out with Mary Shelley. And he's hung about with a few others. Wordsworth hung about with Coleridge. That's just Gothic poetry, literature, and stuff like that. But obviously, still tapping into like Rochester and Shakespeare, even with Macbeth. But all these people are a part of a group of people that have learned all these things about nature and alchemy and the horrors and the sociable, psychological things, and they're applying these things into the writings as signposts for, you know, potential ills in society to protect people. I believe as a storyteller, as parents, or just a loving, caring person. Do you know what I mean?
Man-made monsters, vampires, werewolves, and the like persist as metaphors in the real world, but actual threats in our minds. Gothic literature is a coping mechanism for the terrors that people are subject to every day. But just because we see these things in real life doesn't mean we stray from them.
Writers often get dismissed as alcoholics and this, that, and the other, you know, rock stars of their ages in the past. Now they're seen as quiet and boring, but nobody with imagination and applying it is boring. But what I noticed in these groups is you've got people involved in sciences. So, for instance, Bram Stoker, he was in the Golden Dawn thing. We know about that later on changed its name and this, that, and the other, along with Crowley and Yeats and all this. And during that time, there was a science renaissance, as it were. And these people started, them specifically, understood a lot of these sciences. And some people were scared of things with these sciences, could see that there was bad ways of these sciences going, and there was good, depending on how it would be used and who would be using the tools and the knowledge. So they wrote things about that preemptively. And I think it's just a very thing, because almost coincidence that Mary Shelley's father was indeed a doctor. And some of the elements she is drawing from is in real life, with horror stories that she's heard, obviously from her father, obviously from this, that, and the other.
Strange Nocturnal himself uses these ideals and aesthetic in his music.
I do a lot in my music, in my with my lyrics, but when it comes to Gothic, it's always dark. Yet there's some beauty and ray of hope, and especially within the architecture context, the arches, the shadows, and the you know, there's all that within the buildings, within the trees, within the nature. It's the shapes that scare us. It's the sounds that scare us. And once you get used to that, they don't scare you. But once you get used to something, there's always something that's going to be there from the spectrum that you just weren't quite prepared for.
Gothic literature is both angelic and an abomination, a true dichotomy of the human psyche. It pushes and pulls at our fears, both to help us and keep us crazy for more.